Tragic but interesting things are happening in the Kuru household. From a previous episode, we know that Bhishma has stepped down as heir to the throne. After Shantanu's death, Shantanu's oldest son with Satyavati is made king. His name is Chitrangada. Chitrangada is a good king. He is especially known for his prowess in the battlefield. Unfortunately, Chitrangada was killed in a battle with the king of the Gandharvas, who was also named Chitrangada. It was a 3-year-long battle fought on the banks of the river Hiranyavati. At the end of the battle, the two kings fight a duel in which the Kuru king Chitrangada was killed. Chitrangada's younger brother Vichitravirya is made king. Vichitravirya was very young, and he ruled with the help of his half-brother Bhishma. Pretty soon, Bhishma and Satyavati decide that the young king must marry. It was imperative that Vichitravirya produce sons because he was the last in line of the Kuru lineage. And if there were no more heirs, then the Kuru lineage would end, plunging their world into political instability and uncertainty. Keep listening to know how the two stewards of the clan, the more senior members of the family, Bhishma and Satyavati, save the Kuru dynasty from dying out, and how this results in the birth of Dhritarashtra, Pandu and Vidura. Bhishma and Satyavati will stop at nothing to make sure the Kuru clan survives and thrives. Namaste. So glad you're here. I'm your host Nivi, and this is Stories of India Retold podcast, your source for well-researched stories from the critical edition of the Mahabharata. You can listen to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and the podcast videos are available on YouTube and Spotify. You'll find the resources used for the episode in the episode description as always. So let's get to the story. Young Prince Vichitravirya must marry, and he must produce heirs. So when news of the king of Kashi holding a Swayamvara for 3 of his daughters reaches Bhishma, he decides that they are the perfect match for Vichitravirya. And yes, Bhishma is intent on all 3 princesses for Vichitravirya. The princes are set to marry in a Swayamvara. Swayam means self and Vara means groom in Sanskrita, and it is an ancient Indian practice where the woman would choose her husband from a group of eligible suitors made available for her by her family. So the family would send out invites to eligible grooms, and they would attend the Swayamvara at the set venue on the set time. And there they would try and woo the princesses. Bhishma, however, instead of having Vichitravirya try and win the princesses, decides that he would forcefully abduct these princesses for Vichitravirya. We have to assume Bhishma just doesn't think Vichitravirya was up for it, or maybe he was just too young. Who knows? Anyways, Bhishma goes to the Swayamvara alone and challenges everyone present to try and stop him before dragging the princesses to his chariot and driving off with them. The princess's father, the king of Kashi, and the other kings and princes present at the Swayamvara were outraged at Bhishma's disrespectful behavior. It was just not done. Quickly, they get ready and go off in pursuit of Bhishma. Bhishma single-handedly deflects all of their attacks and defeats them all. Now, of all the kings, a king named Shalva seemed the angriest and waged the most aggressive attack against Bhishma. A fierce duel ensues between them. Unfortunately for Shalva, not only was Bhishma an accomplished warrior, but he also had access to more developed weapons. He used an advanced weapon named Varuna, With this weapon, he first attacked and killed the 4 horses pulling Shalva's chariot. With his next arrow, he attacked and killed Shalva's charioteer. This was game over for Shalva. But Bhishma spares Shalva's life. Shalva is humiliated. He accepts defeat, he's devastated, and he returns back to his city. So do the other kings and princes. And now Bhishma was free to take the princesses to Hastinapura. Once there, he consults with Satyavati and other members of the court, and they all decide that Vichitravirya must marry all 3 princesses. Soon, preparations for the wedding are underway. There was a lot of excitement around the wedding, it's a royal wedding, right? Of course there's excitement. But there's at least one person who wasn't over the moon. And it is the bride. The eldest of the 3 princesses, Amba, does not want this wedding. Because she wanted to marry the king of Saubha. The king of Saubha and Amba had already asked and received her father's blessings, and they were set to marry at the Swayamvara. And here's the kicker. The King Shalva, who fought against Bhishma valiantly to try and rescue the princesses and failed, well, he was actually none other than the king of Saubha. He was trying to rescue the woman he wanted to marry. Amba goes to Bhishma and tells him all about her and Shalva, and she pleads with Bhishma to let her go. She reasons with him that given the situation, it would be against dharma for her to marry someone else. Bhishma consults with other members of the court, and they all decide that this is more trouble than they want, so they decide to let Amba go. She's finally returned to her father. Now, that is not the end of Amba's story. Unfortunately, Amba has a tragic end. But before her death, she makes a vow to take revenge against Bhishma because she rightly believes that Bhishma was the cause of her predicament. And later, it is said that she was reborn as Shikandi, who ultimately brings about the downfall of Bhishma. But that's a story for another day. Amba's 2 sisters, Ambika and Ambalika, are married to Vichitravirya. The princesses gradually adjust to their life as Vichitravirya's wives. Vichitravirya was well liked and admired. He was also young and handsome, and they lived with him happily. That is, until another tragedy strikes the Kuru kingdom. Vichitravirya gets sick with consumption, and the young king's life is snuffed out rather suddenly. This was a devastating blow to the Kuru kingdom. Not only was he their king, he was also the last in line. It was a dire situation, and drastic measures were needed to save the day. Before we get into what these drastic measures were, I would like to remind my dear listeners and viewers that I am retelling the story from the critical edition of the Mahabharata, and I am not changing the story in any way. If you have any questions or doubts about the next part of the story, I would ask you to please refer to the resources listed in the episode description. Here is how they solve the issue of lack of a male heir, and it all hinges upon the ancient Indian practice called Niyoga, which we'll come back to shortly. So here's what's happening. Satyavati has lost both her sons, and the Kuru dynasty has lost its last heir. A grieving Satyavati has just performed the funeral rites of her last son. But duty calls. So she calls over Bhishma, and they have a discussion about their next steps because they needed to do something. The Kuru dynasty was about to end. Satyavati tells Bhishma that for the sake of the kingdom, he must marry, produce sons, and also ascend the throne. She also tells him that because Vichitravirya did not have sons with his wives, he must have sons with them, so that their line does not end. Bhishma refuses because remember, he made a vow of brahmacharya, and he also made a vow to Satyavati's father that he would not ascend the throne. Satyavati presses him. She tells him that their circumstances are just too dire. They needed to do something. She asks him if he knew of something that they could do which would fall well within the confines of dharma but would still help them with their problems. Bhishma says, I might know something that might work. Bhishma tells her some incidents from the past. There once lived a sage turned warrior named Parashurama. Parashurama's dear father was tragically and cruelly killed by a Kshatriya king. A grieving Parashurama gets his revenge by killing the Kshatriya king. And now Parashurama believes that the entire Kshatriya race was corrupt and was the cause of a lot of suffering in the world. He decides to rid the world of all the Kshatriyas. He goes on a carnage and kills them all. The entire ruling class was in danger of dying out. So the widows of these Kshatriyas go to Brahmanas and ask them to father their sons. The sons born to them in this way continued the line, saving the entire ruling class. So Bhishma tells Satyavati that they too can similarly ask an eligible Brahmana to father the sons that they needed. Additionally, Bhishma also tells Satyavati a couple of other stories of similar cases. Satyavati is convinced. She carefully considers Bhishma's words. She thinks she might have a solution. When Satyavati was a young girl, and this was before she met Shantanu, she met a sage named Parashara, and they had a baby together who was named Krishna Dwaipayana. Satyavati reveals this to Bhishma and tells him that they could ask Dwaipayana for help because he was an accomplished Brahmana and he had promised to help Satyavati whenever she needed it. Bhishma agrees and Satyavati sends for Dwaipayana immediately. Satyavati explains the situation to Dwaipayana and tells him that the Kuru dynasty needed an heir, which is why they needed him to have sons with the widowed wives of the late Vichitravirya. And if you're thinking, wait, what is happening here? How is that even possible? Let me explain. What this is the ancient practice of Niyoga. This is how author V.B. Mishra explains Niyoga. He says, and I quote, "The practice of Niyoga, where a woman could beget son through the younger brother of a husband during the lifetime of the latter if he was incapable of procreation, or after his death if he died without any male child. During the lifetime, it was effected with the permission of the husband, and after his death with the permission of the elders." End quote. Although Mishra notes that the choice of a man didn't seem confined to just the younger brother. So basically what this means is that if a married couple was suffering from infertility, in that case, the wife could have sons through the process of Niyoga by another male. And in cases where the husband was still alive, it was done with the permission of the husband. And in cases where the husband was dead, like in the case of Vichitravirya and his wives Ambika and Ambalika, then the decision was made by the elders of the husband's family. And this worked at the time because a woman's womb was considered her husband's kshetra or territory. So any child that she has would belong to her husband regardless of who the biological father may have been. And the Mahabharata talks about this in quite some detail too. Let's dive deeper into the exchange between Satyavati and Bhishma. According to the rules of Niyoga, the late husband's brother must perform it. In this particular case, that brother would be Bhishma, but Bhishma refuses to the Niyoga union because of his vow of brahmacharya. Instead, he tells Satyavati that they could use the help of an eligible brahmana for the purpose. And to support his arguments, he tells her about incidents that happened in the past, because now they had precedence, which meant that it would fall within the confines of dharma. Satyavati had not heard of such a thing before, but she accepted Bhishma's wisdom. And that is how Niyoga worked. For better or for worse, in a society where only male children could inherit and were considered both socially and spiritually as necessary, this was a system in place to deal with the lack of male heirs. And again, I will leave all of the references in the episode description. So as you can see, this was serious business. And Dwaipayana, the learned man that he was, understood what his mother was asking of him. He agrees, but he has a couple of conditions of his own. Firstly, he wanted both the women to complete a purification ritual. And secondly, and most importantly, he says that both the women should be able to tolerate his ugliness. You heard it right. Dwaipayana was very unkempt and dirty. The book calls him fierce looking. He had dirty, matted, copper-colored hair with unkempt beard and had a very bad body odor. Now, Dwaipayana was aware of this, but he says that he had just returned from the forest where he had lived for a long time as an ascetic. So he's not in that space mentally to care about his appearance. So he says that the women must deal with it. So Satyavati agrees. When the time was right, Satyavati goes to Ambika and explains the situation to her and tells what they wanted her to do. Ambika was born a princess. She knew her duty well. She agrees. That night, Ambika was waiting in her bed. Unfortunately for Ambika, Satyavati had not revealed to her who would be responsible for the task, and Ambika assumed that it would be someone she knew, someone from the clan, because that was how it was generally done. So she was shocked and she panicked when she saw the fierce-looking Dwaipayana in her bed. She closed her eyes and she remained that way throughout the process. Dwaipayana is less than impressed. So he tells Satyavati that Ambika would be blessed with a strong and healthy baby boy and he would father 100 sons, but he would be born blind. True to his words, Ambika gives birth to a strong and healthy boy, but he was born blind. He is named Dhritarashtra. Satyavati wasn't happy because a blind prince cannot legally inherit. So she asked Dwaipayana to produce another son. It was now Ambalika's turn. Ambalika was scared when she saw Dwaipayana and she turns pale. She remains that way throughout the process. Again, Dwaipayana is less than impressed. He tells Satyavati the son born to Ambalika would be born pale and he would be named Pandu, which means pale. Again, Satyavati wasn't happy, so she tells Dwaipayana to produce another son. It was Ambika's turn again. Poor Ambika. She loses her nerve just thinking about her experience the first time around. So she cheats. When the night came, Ambika dresses her maid in fine clothes and jewelry and sends her to Dwaipayana instead. The maid serves Dwaipayana well. Dwaipayana is very happy with her, so he blesses her with a son who was both healthy and wise. This son was named Vidura, who was said to be the deity Dharma himself. Vidura was born to a Shudra mother, but he was accepted as part of the family by the Kuru clan. But again, he could not legally inherit. And that is the story of how, with the birth of Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura, the Kuru lineage was saved. It is interesting to note that after everything that they did to save the dynasty, both Dhritarashtra and Vidura could not legally inherit. Pandu was the only prince who could legally inherit, and this complication regarding the inheritance of the kingdom is part of the central issue of the story of Mahabharata, because the sons of the firstborn Dhritarashtra believed that their father, and by extension they, were wrongly denied the throne. That is all I have for you today. I hope you liked this story, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. I will see you here soon. Thank you so much. Dhanyavada.